This presentation provides an introduction to the components of service learning and how to conceptualize, implement, and assess service learning. But first, a question. What does learning to play the piano and learning about service learning have in common? Well, even if you don't play the piano now, but took lessons a long time ago, there's a good chance you can recall parts or all of what you learned back when you were a kid taking piano lessons from the lady down the street. In fact, you could probably name the notes on the lines of the treble clef if you use the first letter mnemonic device of every good boy does fine. Well, this presentation is a quick overview of the basic constructs of service learning using a first letter mnemonic device of OPERA to help you remember the steps and process. And each component is illustrated here with a case study. O stands for objectives. P stands for partnerships. E is for engagement. R is for reflection. And A is for assessment. When we operationalize service learning, it's circular, and it begins with objectives because they drive everything that takes place in a partnership. And in a partnership, students are engaged in service that meets the instructional objectives of a course and the objectives of a community agency. And throughout the experience, they reflect on what they're learning and what they're doing. And at the end of the semester, we conduct assessment to see if we met the objectives. When we talk about objectives, we're really talking about objectives squared because there's two parts to it. First, there's the instructional objectives of what you want your students to learn and do. And then there's the community partner objectives, what your partner wants to see happen. Let's look at a case study. The instructional objectives of an undergraduate business leadership course indicated students will demonstrate mastery and application of program evaluation skills that include data collection, quantitative and qualitative data analysis, and effective articulation of the results. The executive director of a nonprofit social service agency needed to conduct program evaluations to help with programming and to provide impact data to its board of directors and local government agencies. Pause this video presentation for a moment to jot down some initial thoughts about learning objectives you want your students to meet, and then resume the video presentation. Okay, great. But you'll recall there's actually another part to objectives. Service learning also involves and includes meeting the objectives of a community partner. And there's only one way to find out what those objectives might be. Contact a potential partner, sit down, and ask them. In partnerships, the emphasis is on partnerships rather than on placements. And SILSA can help play matchmaker if you don't know where to start to find a potential partner out in the community. A community partner is not merely a site. They're actually a co-educator. They can help you conduct reflection with your students, serve as a guest speaker in your class. They might even be a co-author or co-presenter. They might serve on a departmental or program advisory board at the college. They could even help evaluate and assess your students. Think of this as a courtship process. You're going to spend time getting to know each other, learning about the agency and its goals. You'll be sharing your instructional objectives of the course, as well as looking at the course syllabus. You'll be discussing your students' skill levels and identifying the agency's priorities. Then you'll explore a match between the priorities and the instructional objectives. And if it doesn't work out, well, you can always part as good friends. But if it is a fit, you move on and get engaged. More on establishing partnerships in another presentation. Stay tuned. Pause the video presentation for a moment to jot down some initial thoughts about partnerships. Do you know some agencies to contact? Have you thought about roles your partner might play? Then resume the video presentation. Engagement. Now it's time to think and discuss with a community partner just exactly what the students will be doing to meet your instructional objectives and their objectives that will help them achieve their mission. Here's our case study again. the instructor was introduced to the director of a nonprofit agency that had multiple programs, all needing formal assessment and evaluation. Together, the instructor and community partner discussed the instructional goals of the class and the skill level of the students, as well as the needs of specific programs. In this way, both the instructor and community partner were able to determine if a partnership was feasible, given timelines, logistics, and the student's skill level. In engagement, you're going to determine who is doing what, when, and where. This is the meaningful action designed to meet course objectives, as well as the needs of the agency. And you will develop a covenant and an action plan to see that it all happens. Students are allocated a specific amount of time outside of class, either directly on site or indirectly off-site, to complete community-based assignments, just like any other traditional type of assignment. Let's look at a typical semester. Often they consist of 15 weeks. For most service learning classes, students are spending 1 to 2 hours each week doing the service over the course of the 15 weeks. But some courses, like a service learning course going to New Orleans after a Katrina hurricane, might have a bulge in the middle. The first 4 or 5 weeks might be spent in class learning about important information related to the service project and experience in New Orleans. Then the bulk of the service takes place in the middle of the semester, and then they return. Then there's the roller coaster approach. In this case, students may be doing upfront work, like assessment, and then in the middle of the semester, they're working together as teams to develop some kind of implementation project. And then they return to the community the last half of the semester to actually implement the project they developed. The point here is there's no one way to outline and allocate the hours the students will be involved with in their service over the course of a 15-week semester. Look at our case study again. Students gathered and analyzed data for 2 hours each week for the community partner over the course of the 15-week semester with a specific deadline. Students were actively engaged in applying the skills they were learning about program evaluation in their leadership course. And in turn, the community agency was getting much needed information they did not have the time nor expertise to gather themselves. And the results were presented in a formal report that could be used by the partner for programming, other reports, and grant writing. Pause this video presentation for a moment to jot down some initial thoughts about what you want your students to be engaged in, and consider the timelines of how that might look. Then resume the video presentation. Reflection. What comes to mind when you hear that word? Is it written reports, journals, group hugs? Well, reflection is not a technical report of data or observations. Technical reports are intended for another person or audience, whereas reflection is primarily a personal exercise intended for the individual having the experience. Reflection is the intentional consideration of an experience in light of instructional objectives. Reflection can take many formats. They can be done in writing, they can be done orally in large group or small groups. You can even conduct reflection in simulation activities or debates. One rubric for reflection is known as the ABCs, in which students are invited to reflect on the affective nature of their service learning experience, as well as the behaviors they engaged in, and to make concrete connections to class content to determine the cognitive growth that's taken place. There are other methods as well, such as the what, so what, and now what method. And SILSA can help you learn these methods and other methods if you need help. Reflection takes place before, during, and after the service. It's not just something you do at the end of the semester. Let's go back to our case study. Beyond debriefing on their experience of applying new technical skills, the students reflected on the mission and the need for the community agency. And using the ABC's reflection rubric, students were able to intentionally consider how they were feeling about the experience itself, as well as the mission and purpose of the agency in addressing critical social issues. They also reflected on what they were doing as students, but also what they might do in the future as professionals and citizens to help address the underlying social issues the agency works with. Finally, they reflected on what they had learned in terms of leadership skills, as well as what they had learned about their own role and responsibility as citizens in a just and democratic society. Pause the video presentation for a moment to jot down some initial thoughts and impressions you have about reflection. Do you have some new insights as to what it could or might be? Then resume the video presentation. The last step is assessment. And at this stage, we want to determine if the instructional objectives and the community partners' objectives were met. Traditionally, this has been done through exams or papers. But an actual product developed in the service learning indicates mastery and application of information and skills. Pre- and post surveys on attitudes can also reveal different kinds of student growth. Content analysis of reflection journal entries can provide qualitative information to document growth and development. Let's return to our case study for a moment. The analysis and report was an authentic form of assessment because the students demonstrated mastery of skills and concepts from the course by actually applying them. The instructor's objective of developing program evaluation assessment skills was accomplished, and the community partners' objectives of obtaining valuable data was also accomplished. Beyond the summative assessment of achieving mutual goals, the instructor and community partner conducted formative evaluation to assess the overall experience as a way of identifying what worked and what didn't work, and using this to help forge future partnerships. Pause the video presentation again, just for a moment, to jot down some initial thoughts about assessment. Do you have any new insights as to what assessment could or might be? Then resume the video presentation. So we're back where we started. Objectives drove everything we did in the partnership, and the students were engaged in meaningful activities and service that were tied to those objectives. Throughout their experience, they reflected on what they were learning and doing, and at the end of the semester, we assessed whether or not the objectives we outlined at the very beginning of the semester were actually met. So, are you ready to do service learning on your own? Well, probably not. But you do have a good overview as a foundation to build from. There are other video presentations that go into much more detail on the components that were introduced here. More information on things like reflection, direct service, indirect service, and community-based research. So just for fun, pause the video and see if you can recall each step presented here. See, that wasn't so hard, was it? And while watching a training video on your computer is a good start, it's not enough by itself. Be sure to meet and consult with SILSA staff for ongoing support. Thanks.